פ"ח, עמוד א', 88, 7 lines from the top of the page. The Gemarrah returned to a discussion in regards to the prophecy of consolation in the book of Hosea. ואמר רבי אלעזר מאי דכתיב, והלכו עמים רבים ואמרו לו, לכו ונעלה להר השם אל בית אלוקי יעקב. They said in the book of Isaiah chapter 2 that many nations will go and ask to go and ascend to the mount of God of Jacob. So the question is, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Abraham, Yitzchak, we're always mentioning in our literature, always Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why they use in term of holy Beit HaMikdash, holy temple, just because of descendants of Jacob. Ela, in the future, lo ke'Avraham shekatuv bo har, the way that they approach the Beit HaMikdash, the Maharsha said, it's not like Abraham, that it's written there, har, shene'emar, asher yamerom b'ashar Hashem yira'eh, in the portion of the binding of Isaac in Bereshit, Genesis 22, they said, that said the day that Hashem will appear, v'lo b'Yitzchak shekatuv bo sadeh, not like Isaac, it's written a field, shene'emar v'yetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh, part of our learning on the Mincha services, the Isaac went to talk in the field. It's a book of Genesis chapter 24. Ela ki Yaakov shekar'o bait, but as Jacob, it's written as language of a house. Shene'emar, chapter 28 in the book of Genesis. Vayikra et shem makom hahu Beit El. They call upon that place a house of God, Beit El. So it means that Maharsha tells us that both of them, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they all pray in the Har Bayit, in the Temple Mount, but each of them call in his way, in his conceptualization's way, word of Beit HaMikdash. And Rashi said that only Yaakov, Jacob called that a Bayit, a home, a house. Maharsha elaborates on that, and he said that the word Har applied to the first temple, which have the divine providence who protected, in our language, at the top of the mountain. But that was, in a sense, temporary. Sadeh, it's more applicable to the second Beit HaMikdash, according to the Maharsha, because it was several missing points that was in the first Solomon temple. And the third one, which will be speedy built, Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi, the third temple, so that's the applicable of Yaakov. So Natan just came from that place, right? From Beit El. Okay. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we continue to our discussion, Hosea chapter 2, in regards to the exile. Gadol kibbutz galuyot kiyom shenivru bo shamayim v'aretz. The exile of the Jewish people, it's great, the same as gathering in creation of the heaven and earth. שנאמר ונקבצו בני יהודה ובני ישראל יחדיו ושמו להם ראש אחד ועלו לארץ גדול מישראל, which means that they said that it will be a day in gathering all the Jews that we are facing that great phenomena. וכתיב, it's said in Bereshit in Genesis 1, ויהי רבעי בוקר יום אחד. So it means the same is written יום גדול, יום אחד. So we derive from the word yom. Rashi said that that's applied to both. The same way as the ex nihilo, that the creation from nothingness, yesh me'ayin, that's the same way that you have all the ingathering of the Jewish people from all different corners gathered together as one extended family, and that we are again witnesses to this beautiful phenomena. We learn also in the Mishnah, yatom sheshachatu alav apotropusim. We talk about orphan, that they have custodians, that they took place of a Paschal lamb for him. Shamat mina yesh breira. Remember our discussion of yesterday, we talk about breira, which means, do we have retroactive perception of taking the Paschal lamb or not? Which means, we have a process, we said it several times. You have a Paschal lamb, you bring the offering, you slaughter it, and then you sprinkle the blood, and then you eat it. So it's crucial at the first stage that we designate the Paschal lamb to a specific purpose and specific person, etc., etc. So if a person said at the time of eating that he wants this specific offering meaning that he wanted from this Paschal, and imagine they have different group and he wishes a specific group. So we go and follow up. However, what happened if it wasn't clear at the time of slaughtering? So we concluded here that yesh b'rira, that we go by the retroactive act, that therefore he can eat it because he's partake of that group. Amar Rabbi Zera rejected and he said, se labait. They said in the Torah, a lamb for the household. So that's in Exodus 12. So we derive from that the minor membership of the household is sufficient for him to be registered in a household's Paschal lamb in any case, mikol makom, even without his consent. So the power of those custodians, it's not because of the orphan. Tanu Rabbanan, Selabait, מלמד שאדם מביא ושוחט על ידי בנו וביתו הקטנים. A person can bring the Paschal lamb by his son, young daughters, ועל ידי עבדו ושפחתו הכנענית, if he's his Canaanite maid or servant, בין מדעתם משלום מדעתם, regardless if they have their consent, because Rashi said a person have the obligation to educate his children, so he can make them as part of registration on his Paschal lamb. אבל אינו שוחט על ידי בנו וביתו הגדולים. He is not, cannot do it by the adult children, son, daughters, ולא על ידי עבדו ושפחתו העברים, Hebrew servants, ועל יד אשתו אלא מדעתן. You need to have their consent to agree. So for example, in a husband and wife relationship, the husband have the obligation to support, sustain, that's part of the ketubah. So therefore, since the Gemarrah said in Ketubot 58 that she can evoke her rights from him, so it's not considering in that sense as part of his household. And the Braita concluded, וכולן ששחטו ושחט רבן, עליהן יוצאים בשל רבן ונוצאים בשל עצמם, חוץ מן האישה שיכולה למחות. So excluding the wife that she can revoke her right. In other words, she said that she would not wish to be registered on the Paschal lamb of her husband. All the rest can exempt by their master, owner, etc., etc. So Gemara asked, "Ma'ishna isha," and here Rashi add the word klomar. Ma'ishna i me'avdov shifchato ha'ivrim. So I explained in my book Bira Klomar Berashi al Hashas that we understand on the surface that what's the difference between Isha and others, wife and other in the Korban. So he said it means not that she is different in that sense, but we have a different category for her than the others because of the Gemarrah in Ketubot we just mentioned, but you're welcome to read it in the book further. Amar Rava Isha v'chol dedamila. That's the point of Rava. He said that it's applied to wife, but all of the similar to her, which means that we included also adult children, Hebrew slave, etc. Haguf akasha. So they said you are now contradicting yourself. Amar chutz ma'isha shichula limchot tama demachia lo marche nafka b'shel bala. As long as she objected it, so fine. Otherwise she go by her husband. V'aktan reisha v'lo yodei ishto lo midatam. As tama lo nafka. So in other words, if he did it without total consent, she's not exempt from Paschal lamb. So my ela medata. What do you mean by saying that you requested their only with their consent? He said, lav de amri ein. It's not when they insisted and say yes. Ela bistama. They don't say anything. La puke echad amru lo. So you where they explicitly said lo, clearly excluding themselves from their one who in charge for the Paschal lamb. So they said, "V'ha kulam shachatu v'shachata rabam lehem yotzim b'shel rabam." But we said that any of them, which is minor children and Canaanite slave who slaughter a Paschal lamb and their master also slaughter a Paschal lamb on their behalf, fulfill his obligation. So they said, and we learn, excluding the wife, that she can protest and exempt for adult children and Hebrew slaves. So Amarav Agron Kevan Shachatu and Lechamaicho Gedol Zeh. The Rava said, since they slaughter their own Paschal lamb, so if they have independent Korban Pesach, you do not have a protest greater than that, because that's the act of slaughtering independently on their own Paschal lamb. It's proof clearly that they demonstrate the intent to partake of their own lambs and do not intend to be included in the master's group. Now, another part in the Mishnah we said, Eved shel shnei shutafim. So if you have a servant that you have two partners, so you shouldn't eat from both. רמי לרב עינר סבא לרב נחמן, תנן עבד ששני שותפים לא יאכל משל שניהם, והתנא רצה מזה אוכל מזה, רצה אוכל מזה, give the option, so it's a brighter contradict the Mishnah. אמר לי עינה סיבה, סבא, like עינה the elder, ואמר לה פתיה אוקמה, it's like a black pot, it's a patya, it's like kinui, it's like in our language is a nickname for someone who study Torah perseverely. In the sense of someone who's so occupied in the Torah, in those days did not even have a time or deed of laundry. So it's like the dress is like black. Maharsha have a different opinion that it's applied to his appearance. Anyway, mini uminach tistem shmata. By oath we understand this shmata. Matnitin bedekaf de'adade. The Mishnah speaks about a situation that the partners are very strong with each other. In other words, they don't wish to derive any benefit from each other. So each of them do not wish to see the other derive any joy from the part of their partnership of that servant. Brighter the look up there. The brighter speak about partners that don't care of each other. In other words, the servant can eat from whichever he chooses. It's a sensitive of the rabbis to the interaction between partners. The Mishnah said it's one who have a half ownership. Half he is a servant and a half free. Lo yochal mishel rabo. He should not eat from his master. Mishel rabo de lo yochal, but mishel atzmo yochal. So in other words, if he stole the Paschal lamb independently, he can eat. V'atanya lo yochal lo mishelo v'shelo shelo. We learn about that he shouldn't eat from neither from himself, not from his master. Lokashya. Kan kemishna rishona, that's one according to the Hora'ah, the ruling of Beit Hillel, that one who is a half a servant, half free, you don't force his master to free him. Kan kemishna achona, that the Beit Hillel, that none. It said in Gittin, page 41. One is a half servant and half free. He should serve his master one day and himself one day, which means one day is by himself, one day is for others. So in other words, the masters and the servants have a partnership in the ownership, so they divided the right in that sense. That divrei Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim. Beit Shammai, however, said. So 88b. So the Gemarrah said, "Tikantem et rabo, ve'et atzmo lo tikantem," which means you basically fix in that sense his master, that he's not losing anything from his rights, but the servant you don't fix, because Lisa Shichfra no yachol, shekvar chetzio ben chorin, he cannot marry a maid because he's already half free, so therefore he's forbidden to marry a maid. They said v'lo yekadesh b'nei Yisrael, said in Dvarim, Deuteronomy 23. So Unkel said v'lo yisav garo b'nei Yisrael ad et ha'ama. It's prohibition against marry a maid. But on the other hand, he's like in torn lives, because he cannot marry also someone since he's a half servant. It's also applied to the female part. Yibatel, so in other words, he's now cannot produce children. The reason that God created the world is to occupy the world and fruitful and multiply. God created the world, Isaiah said in chapter 45, in order to increase the inhabitants and populate the world, not to be empty. In order to allow the servant to fulfill the mitzvah and bring children to the world, we force the master to make him free. So he basically make him free by release the half of ownership, and there וחוטב שטר על חצי למען, he writes a release contract, וחזרו בית הלל להורות כבית שמאי. So בית הלל changed and back off and went to בית שמאי, that someone is a half servant, half free, can have independent paschal lamb, and you basically force the owner to free him, so it's like total free person. The next Mishnah is also speaking about two different paschal lamb for one person. האומר לעבדות צא ושחוט עלי את הפסח. If a person not specified what he meant by paschal lamb, he said, go and make paschal lamb for me. Can be goat, lamb, and others. So shachat gdi yochal. Shachat tale yochal. Regardless if he brought goat or other sheep, he can eat. Shachat gdi vetale. But if you have both, yochal min harishon, he should eat from the first one. And Rashi said the second one should be burned. Because a person, as we said several times, cannot have two paschal lamb at one time. Now, if he was very clear and lucid, the owner, saying what he expecting him to do, shachach ma amar lo rabo, ketzad yaseh, if the owner told him specifically, but the servant forget what the master told him, what should we do? Shchat tale v'gdi, mishul slaughter both, tale, both, goat and sheep. ויאמר, אם גדי אמר לי רבי גדי שלו ותלה שלי, אם תלה אמר לי רבי תלה שלי וגדי שלו. So in other words, whatever happened, I'm going by the assumption that either one of them, the other one will be mine, and the other one, the first one will be his. שכח רבו, מה אמר לו, in the opposite way, that his master forget what he told him. שניהם יצאו לבית השרפה, you have to burn both, because by the act of uncertainty, maybe that paschal be eaten for people who are not registered, since we are not sure if it's the master or the servant. They're also exempt from bringing the second set of paschal offering, which is the 14 of Iyar, because the slaughtering and sprinkling of blood was properly one for the master, one for the servant. Since we don't know which one of them, by heaven it's clear, by us we are not sure. So Tosfot Rabbi Akiva Eiger said that that's by force of circumstance, you have to burn it, but in heaven they know, so they have the fulfillment of that mitzvah, they don't have to go for the second Passover. Pshita, they said, that's obvious, the first part of the Mishnah, which means if the master not specified which one, you can have the freedom of choice to choose which one, the servant have the choice. Shachal di yochal, hafal gidi ragil batale, shachat tale yochal, hafal gidi ragil bedi. So he said, the reason is that if the servant slaughter a goat, the owner can eat it, even he gets used to the other food, tale, and vice versa. So the Mishnah said, "Shachal gdi v'tale yochal min harishon." V'tane lemnim lo shnei psachim kechad. We just said that you cannot have two paschal lamb on one, which means ein brera. So in other words, when he make a decision at the time of eating, which one he wants to eat, you cannot go by a retroactive act and say that that was set up earlier. Because maybe it happens when they are slaughtered, he was in mind to something else. So why the Mishnah said he can eat from the first? It said, Matnit b'melech malka. So they speak about king and queen, they always depend upon their servant to prepare the meal, and they are not scrupulous what exactly they're going to make for them, if it's a goat or sheep or others. So they can go, you don't need to have this rule of breira. It was a real story of king and queens that did it. One goat, one is a kid. They come to king, he said, ask the queen. So asked the queen, he said, go to Rabban Gamliel and ask him. Which means that they are light-hearted in the sense that they don't have a strict rules, should they have kid or goat. Yochlu min harishon, they should eat from the first one. And now we are like average people. We, since we are very strict over the food, we don't know which one was designated to whom, so we cannot eat from neither one of them. Leta'ah is one of the 8 creeping animals that the Torah said in Vaikra in Leviticus 11 that they are became ritually impure. What is a lizard? What they said in your Gemarrah in English? Anyway, in the slaughterhouse of the king, they want to make ritually impure the entire meal because they thought that she's dead, and therefore she make all the food impure. באו ושאלו את המלך, they come and ask the king what to do. אמר להם, לכו ושאלו את המלכה. Go and ask the queen. באו ושאלו את המלכה, אמר להם, לכו ושאלו את רבן גמליאל, באו ושאלו אותה, אמר להם, בית המטבחיים, רותח או צונן. So here I explained my book, ביורה, כלומר ברש"י על הש"ס. So Rashi said, he asked, בית המטבחיים, which means the slaughtering house. So what does that mean? It's cold or hot. So it meant to say that that's applied to the, I think it's lizard. You'll find in the slaughterhouse if you found it hot or cold. You can read more in the book, I wish to have more time. אמרו לו רותח, it was hot. אמר להם, לכו והטילוה כוס של צונן. Bring a cup of freezing cold water on the top of that lizard. הלכו והטילו עליה כוס של צונן וריחשה. So she moving, so it turns that she was alive. ותהיה רבן גמליאל כל הסעודה כולה. אז רבן גמליאל make the entire meal kosher and proper, because their law of impurity apply only when they are dead. נמצא מלך תלוי במלכה, which means now it turns, it sounds very interesting that the king depend upon the queen, ונמצאת מלכה תלויה ברבן גמליאל, and the queen depend upon רבן גמליאל, נמצאת כל הסעודה תלויה ברבן גמליאל, the whole meal depend upon רבן גמליאל. Next part is, שכח מה אמר לו רבו. He forget what the teacher tell him. שלי, מה שקנה אבל שנה רבו. You may say that whatever the servant acquired is acquired by the master. אמר רביי, הולך אצל רועה רגיל רבו, דניח לתקנת רבי. He go by the shepherd, that they go by the master's ruling, by the way that he fulfilled the obligation of Paskalem, ומקנה לאחד מנהיו, and the shepherd give to his servant one of the animal, על מנת שאין לרבו רשות בו. In order, he make a very clear declaration that the master has no part of that. So, if basically the Rashi explained to us that if the servant is not sure, he not remember what exactly the teacher told him, the master cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Paskalem only if he take two separate animals and he make a condition that one should be his master and one is his. Otherwise, it's an issue. Anyway, שכח רבו מה שאמר, the opposite way. His master forget what he told him. אמר רבי לא שנו אלא בשכח לאחר זריקה, if it's after sprinkle the blood, which means early part he remembered. דבעינא דזריק דמה וחזה לחלק, because the time of sprinkle the blood, it was ready to eat because he remembered what he said. אבל שכח לפני זריקה, but the early start of the process, only slaughtering but not sprinkle the blood yet. דחי יזריק דם לא אהבה חזה לחלק, because the sprinkle the blood is not remembered, so it's not ready to eat. And we explained many times that the Paskalem crucial part is to eat it afterward. חייבים לעשות פסח שני, they have the obligation to go to 14 of Iyar, פסח שני, and eat it, because they did not fulfill the obligation of eating Paskalem at all, since the sprinkle of the blood make it invalid, because it was not for the purpose of eating meat. There are those who studied what Abaye said according to the Braita. חמישה שנתערבו אורות פסחים זה בזה. If there are 5 people that after they take off the skin of their Paskalem, after slaughtering, they mix them together, ונמצאת יבלת, they have a blemish, some blemish that make this offering invalid, באחד מהם, in one of the skins, כולן יוצאים לבית השרפה, everyone should be burned, ופטורים לעשות דבר שני, they exempt from 14 of Iyar, פסח שני. אמר רבי לא שנו אלא בשנתערבו לאחר זריקה. That's apply only after sprinkling the blood. דבעינא דזריק דם, מלדעה והחזר לה, when sprinkling the blood is ready for eating. אבל נתערבו לפני זריקה, but again, if it was mixed before sprinkling the blood, חייבים לעשות דבר שני, they are obligated to make a second Passover, because the sprinkling of the blood make at a time of disqualification and not for the purpose of eating meat. מה דנא טעמת ניתין, according to Abaye teaches this Mishnah, כל שכן הברייתא, for sure you learn the situation of Braita, because by the Mishnah, when all the uncertainty begins, which is preceding to the sprinkle of blood, so it means that sprinkle of blood was not ready for meal, and therefore you have the obligation to go for the 14 of Iyar, the second Pesach. Even the both offering are basically valid, but independently, and their disqualification, it's only because we're not sure which one is registered for each one of them. But here, for sure, in the Braita, if there are disqualification because they have blemishes, for sure we can, considering the sprinkle of the blood, for both of them as act of disqualification, and you cannot eat it from them. One day teaches the Braita is not applied to the Mishnah, כיוון דקשירנו, because the offering independently kasher, the id kara v'chazer l'achila, that if the master remember which one he have in his mind, each of them was befitting for meal, so therefore even now that he's not sure, kame shmei galya, as we said earlier, by the heavenly way of thinking, it's clear that who is the owner of each of their offering. So in the situation of the Mishnah, Rashi said the prohibition of eating basar, it's not because it's disqualification of the offering itself, it's because the owner is not so sure. But since by heaven they know clearly which one, so the sprinkle of both of them make it befitting for food, even physically they don't eat it. First halacha, it's a Rambam, Hilchot Korban Pesach, chapter 2. One may slaughter a paschal lamb for his wife, adult children, and Hebrew slaves only with their consent. If they are silent or do not protest, like they display equanimity, they remain acquiesce, it is as though they consented. Shachatu ishto banav, if one slaughtered a paschal lamb for his wife, adult children, or Hebrew slaves who also slaughtered a paschal lamb for themselves, they fulfill the mitzvah only with their own lamb, not with the lamb of their husband, father, master, respectively. Rambam, Ilchot Avadim, chapter 7. If one is half slave and half free man, his master is forced to free him, and slave must pay the master half of the value. If a messenger receives explicit instructions pertaining to which type of animal to slaughter on someone's behalf, and the messengers forgot which type was specified, he should slaughter a kid and a lamb, and stipulate that whichever one is requested should be for the person who sent him, and the other one should be for himself. That's Rambam Ilchot Korban Pesach, chapter 3. It's also the Rambam dealing with the opposite way. The Rambam also said that in regards to Melech u'Malka, if a king and queen send their slaves to slaughter a paschal offering for them, and the slaves slaughtered both kid and a lamb, the king and the queen should eat from the one that was slaughtered first. That's the Rambam Ilchot Korban Pesach, chapter 3. Now, in the case of mixture, which means that not sure, but if the hides of the paschal lambs belonging to different people became mixed up, and a rat, which is disqualified in blemish, is found on one of them, the meat of all those paschal lambs must be burned. If the hides were mixed up before the blood was sprinkled on the altar, they are obligated to bring a second Pesach at 14 of Iyar. However, if they were mixed up only after the blood was sprinkled on the altar, they are not obligated to bring a second Pesach. Again, this is Rambam at length, Sefer Korbanot Ilchot Korban Pesach, chapter 3.